And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the Ideas Room tonight already. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, somewhere over the rainbow, blue birds fly. Birds fly over the rainbow. Why can't I? Well, apparently the Iranians want to go to Antarctica over the rainbow. And this is very strange because I've been picking up stories about all of these cruises being canceled to Antarctica. So I'm going to see how these two stories play off against each other tonight as we do an update on some unusual things that are going on in the world in the first, say, 15 minutes of our special report tonight. But tonight is actually all about mystery school encounters and secret space wars. These two pieces go together, and some of these encounters of these figures with the mystery schools are really going to be surprising tonight. I tried to sort of hone in on those special moments where these teachers met with the school and the way that they try to put it on the record without actually putting it on the record because they were sworn to secrecy. We're going to be getting into that tonight in the special report, which is about 90 minutes tonight. It is Dark Journalist X Mystery School Encounters and Secret Space Wars. And I want to remind you in the second part of tonight's program, we're going to be taking your questions. So about 45 minutes to an hour of the presentation and then a half hour of your questions. And Miss Olivia will be taking those as we speak. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, how's it going out there?
Everybody's great.
Really? Oh, fantastic. That's my kind of an audience in the Ideas Room. Well, it's interesting because I think there have been some sort of cracks in the matrix, you could say. And the whole Fannie Willis situation with the lawfare after President Trump and the incredible way that her story is falling apart with all these lavish expenses with this prosecutor that she hired who was her boyfriend and all the details around that. So interestingly enough, Trump is showing that kind of providence and luck that got him into office in 2016. I'm seeing more signs of that around. And it seems to me, this week on Twitter, I was discussing the eye of the tiger that Jack Kennedy had when he became president in 1960 and won the election. And it's interesting because in this election, you're going to need the eye of the tiger in order to win. And whoever has it is going to win. We all know that, in all probability, that Stepford Biden is going to be replaced by some other candidate. So it's hard to say what they're doing there. But he doesn't have it. And nobody else who's really in the race has it. The Bobby... I have a couple of updates on Bobby Kennedy's campaign tonight, and I think they need to replace the campaign crew, as I've put on the record before, because you have a good candidate there with a strong message, but they have the message sprawling all over the place. And some of the things that came out in this article were about the campaign manager Amaryllis Fox that we've pointed out before, who's just young and inexperienced. She's a member of she's an in-law. She married one of Bobby's sons, but it's not, that's a nepotism that's probably not working out in this case. So here's my free advice for Bobby on the campaign trail. Again, replace the campaign manager. I don't know about all this money going to Del Bigtree for PR services that's coming out and all the volunteers quitting because they're hearing about these lavish events in Aspen and stuff like that. Look, Robert Kennedy Sr. went out and he went into the most impoverished neighborhoods and he walked around with a camera crew and those became the newsreels of his campaign. Not big dinners in LA or Aspen champagne. So in this environment with the terrible economy, with World War III on the right there on the radar and these things that are going on, this whole thing that the inside the campaign, they talk about it being like, be a rock star and join the campaign. It's a totally wrong attitude. Be a patriot and get in there and do something for the country, right? So these other people that are taking his campaign and running away with it, unfortunately, I think this is one of the reasons that Kucinich left, because he's a very, steady kind of honest, straight up guy. And
very idealistic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, he'd really faced some odds and gotten some congressional seats that just seemed completely out of reach for a guy that was talking the way that he did, and always very outspoken. So it was a bad sign for Bobby's campaign when that happened. I have the article that came up in relation to his campaign. The thrust of it really was that all this lavish spending was going on with the wrong people, so, and that Fox had hired her nanny or something, to be chief of staff. I mean, there's some crazy stuff there, and it does happen in campaigns, but clean it up fast and get on the campaign trail. And it's funny that I used the eye of the tiger there for really the focus for the 2024 campaign, because you think about those movies and think about Burgess Meredith and the way that he talked to Rocky and stuff. That's the kind of campaign manager that Bobby needs, not like, hey, you're a rock star, let's go to Aspen, So you got to do it, especially if you want to stand up and be counted. And also, I think that it's wrong-headed not to be closer on the Trump, so the Trump-Bobby combination coming in and squeezing out the Biden regime in the middle. That's the dynamic that will work this year. Ask any real hard-nosed political person. That's what they'll tell you. So, I think this is going to be a crucial thing going into 2024. It's a crucial period in this campaign because, the Bobby campaign is a very diffuse message. There's not a central message there. It should be very simple. Here's my economic plan. Here's my plan for keeping us out of World War III. Here's why the Biden regime is so corrupt and why replacing them is so important. Because after all, you're running against Stepford Biden, not against Trump, in fact, because it's Biden who has the job of president. So, it has to be the eye of the tiger on that. And if not, it's going to get complicated because this Joe Manchin and the No Labels Party is, they're already on the ballot in 45 states. And that campaign is, very professionally run. And if they stick Manchin in there, they're going to. He has until the middle of March to be officially on that ticket. It's pretty hilarious because he said he might pick Mitt Romney as his running mate. And it's like, oh, that's the unity ticket. I did suggest that Romney would be on a unity ticket at some point.
That's true.
So let's keep that in mind. But watch, and I mean watch, for this No Labels Party because they're very well organized. And, Manchin is kind of a crossover candidate because he has some conservative credentials, although I think that he voted, with his party, the Democrats, on a lot of really bad bills. But nonetheless, I think that he can be a big player stepping in here. And so the Bobby thing really needs to get on message and throw out the staff, get something really good going on there. On the Trump side, I think Trump is actually doing quite well and also needs to stick on message because it's interesting with Trump. We get, his real strengths come into focus in this campaign. The border, where, we have millions of people flooding in from God knows where. And that's like an invasion of the United States of America. Well, really, out of all these candidates, who do you think would stop it? I mean, Trump for sure would stop it. So, this could be a one-issue campaign because that's so important. Because if you lose the country, everything else it doesn't matter. So if you lose your sovereignty with this massive invasion of unknown people coming in from countries that are hostile to the United States, so this is a very perilous situation. Trump's really good on that and needs to just come out and say, this is my 5-point plan for the economy and run with it because people trust Trump on the economy. If he does that and keeps up the momentum in the campaign, he'll be gold, except for all the legal lawfare that's working against him. So somewhere in that Bobby-Trump combination, the Biden campaign should just fall apart. You have to watch out for the Bobby campaign just being this, kind of orphan campaign out there that's not connected with anything. Then it doesn't have the impact, and it might even prevent everybody from getting to 270. It's funny too when they talk about this percentage stuff. I see them do it too much, and I don't know who's throwing that around in the RFK campaign, but I've put it on the record before. You don't win 270 electoral votes with 34% of the vote. And I mean, look, Ross Perot got 20% of the vote in 1992, and he didn't win any electoral votes. Doesn't work that way. So, you'd have to have a real statewide map for how you're going to win these key states. And we already know the big ones are all locked up: California, New York. Those are all, and Texas, is Republican. California is Democrat. New York is Democrat. That's not going to change. The thing that you could flip are the Rust Belt states and Southwest, things of this nature. So you have to cobble some kind of a map together to make that work. Otherwise, this thing about 34% is a fantasy. So I hope they stop using that, because the candidate is better than the campaign. This is a big problem going forward. And of course, the Biden regime is at an all-time low with what they're doing, and just trying to hang in there. So we must make sure that the forces that are in opposition to the corrupt regime don't split the throw the bums out vote. So we need that vote united, and really to take this administration off of any future consideration for the presidency in 2025. So this is going to be a real rock and roll kind of 2024 campaign, and the UFO file is going to be right in the heart of all of it. We've already seen a lot of fireworks. We've seen fireworks in my work at the beginning of the year with Mellon trying to suppress the UFO whistleblower on this program, and all the craziness from Chris Mellon. And it's interesting, there's another Mellon in the campaign 2024 scene, which is Timothy Mellon, who is he's running the super PAC for Bobby, and he donated $10 million to Trump. This guy is in both camps. They're very interesting too, because his background is very kind of neoconish. So he's very interesting. It's hard to determine what's going on in there, but he's one of many influencers with a lot of money in the middle of this campaign in the Mellon piece. And he's actually John Warner's uncle, this Timothy Mellon, but right in the heart of all of this. So we're seeing a lot of kind of interesting things going on, including the fact that Bigelow may be going back to supporting President Trump now after taking a hiatus with DeSantis, which is pretty hilarious. So we've got quite a scene going on in relation to the 2024 campaign. All the marbles are on the table, and the stakes could not be higher. That's all I could say. I mean, the Biden regime can't be allowed another term as president, or, this will be the end. So for me, I think the chances of removing the Biden regime are incredibly strong, unless somebody bobbles the ball and splits the anti-vote. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Mystery School Encounters in Secret Space Wars. Boy, we have some things to cover here. We're going to do a short report tonight, because we're building up to a major presentation for you next week. So mark it on your calendar now. This is Apotheum, the UFO File Wars, coming up a week from tonight at 8 p.m. And 2-hour presentation. This is really something special that we've worked on, and it has some incredible facts and new information in there, and the production value on the whole thing is going to be phenomenal. Documentary, presentation, the whole thing, it's all there next week, and it's going to be available for you right here on this channel. And I'll tell you, you want to make sure that you don't miss this one, because it's absolutely going to be laying it all out. And I think it's going to change a lot of things in terms of how we view the UFO world and all of the hijinks that have been going on as well, but also gets into this very important concept around Apotheum, which we've been talking about here on the show for a while. And that is the whole kind of, reality distortion physics that is so involved with the UFO phenomena, but also comes directly out of the X technology. So the work of Tesla and others. There's some fantastic information relating to Tesla, Antarctica, and Egypt, of all places, coming through the X series over the coming weeks. So this is going to kick it off. Be there next week at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And this is going to be very special, Apotheum. Now, before I go any further, I want to also remind you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, and it keeps us in touch through is just hardcore censorship that we've been seeing. And literally it takes 30 seconds to sign up at darkjournalist.com. And what you'll get is just the newsletter once or twice a week in your inbox, letting you know about the incredible X series episodes that we have coming up for you. Fantastic interviews that'll blow your mind in the next couple of months, and documentaries, live events, you name it, it's there. So stand up and be counted. Make sure you're on that newsletter list, and we have a direct pipeline with you, because the censorship, let's face it, it's been off the charts. So before I jump into this, Miss Olivia, how's the temperature out there?
Good. The Philip K. Dick Film Festival says, what about these nuclear missiles in space?
Yeah. This is a very important story. I've been watching it and being careful to only comment when I had enough facts about it. So finally tonight I have enough information to speak about it. Everyone went over the cliff on it immediately, but it was an unusual report. So we have this Congressman Turner out of Ohio, who was involved in shooting down the Schumer amendment, which wasn't going to do anything for UFO disclosure anyway, especially when they were like, this is just like the JFK Act, when we didn't give you anything either. But what's interesting to me about this is he made a public to-do about this a couple of days ago and said, look, President Biden, we know there's a threat, and, we've been briefed on it. We want to make it public. Please let the public know. So it freaked everybody out. And you had these officials rolling out and being like, we're on top of the threat, and not explaining what it was. You can see in how they did that, how they would do the UFO file threat and the whole kind of UFO threat piece. Now, it's interesting because a number of congressmen came forward and said, this is pretty bad and space related, but don't worry, it's not aliens. That's how they're talking about this now. They're already at the point of saying, don't worry, we know you're thinking it's aliens. So they know it's in there. That's a very kind of dangerous position for us to be in, with them thinking like that. And for me, I have to say that the first reports were Russia has this thing that's a danger that they are planning on deploying. Then it made it sound like it was deployed, and then it was nukes in space. So I have a few articles on it to sort it out. Before we went live tonight, CNN was reporting that they were putting together an EMP-style nuclear setup to kind of jam satellites, and that they were going to deploy it in space, but it was not yet deployed. But nonetheless, the implications are they're building up weapons in space, right? And so this hostile back and forth between the United States and Russia, these are the fruits of that, which is it's only going to get worse. And it goes all the way back to 1960, in fact, with President Kennedy trying to work out the nuclear test ban treaty, which he did with Khrushchev, which kept us from testing nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. This was a gigantic step forward, and these are the types of things that Russia's getting rid of now, because we've given them a lot of problems, and they also have engaged in capitalizing on our errors when it comes to Ukraine. So there needs to be a gigantic peace process in there. Let's read a little bit of this article, and this is out of the Washington Post. We know that the Washington Post, New York Times, none of these publications are to be trusted, but it's always important to know the official line. And I've worked with some of these guys, so I can tell you for sure not to trust them. With dire warning, concerns rise about conflict in space with Russia. Revelations that Russia may be seeking to deploy a nuclear weapon in space raise fears that go back to Sputnik and the dawn of the space age. These are disturbing, very disturbing headlines indeed, because especially when you consider how we started off last year in February, it was all Chinese balloon, and now you can see how these stories are related. Russia's developing a space-based capability to attack satellites using a nuclear weapon, an aggressive move that has alarmed U.S. national security officials and lawmakers who worry that Russia could interfere with or disable critical communications and intelligence systems, according to people familiar with classified intelligence on the matter. Now, because all of the air has gone out of the balloon of the Ukraine war and they don't have the ability to get that funding going, now they're sort of on the side of saying, well, there's another threat. Maybe we can use this thing that they're doing to gin up another huge thing against Russia. So we have to be very careful about the way that they present it versus what it is. And in any case, demand a whole heck of a lot of proof when these things come down the pike. This is not an active capability that's been deployed, White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters Thursday. Kirby didn't address questions about whether the system was designed to use a nuclear weapon or is perhaps powered by nuclear energy, but citing earlier news reports, he said he could confirm that it was related to anti-satellite capability. Anything that gets to a war starting up there in space runs the risk of exposing secret operations up there from the United States and other countries. So the implications are gigantic on that one. What's interesting to me is, you know, when we look at the things that they've been saying about Artemis going to the moon and how we're sending up a lander that'll be there on the moon for the first time since 1972. Look, you don't disappear for 52 years out of a manned space program and then suddenly return with no explanation. So there's no explanation for what happened to those 52 years in between. And that's the development of this secret space environment and that we've been talking about in this program for a while. So when we understand that infrastructure up there, we can understand a lot about the new economies and why they've been putting this space guy in the middle of social media. That's where you got with the whole Elon story, you know, don't believe the hype. So we have to really do a better job, I would say, on the alternative side. You know, there's a lot of flag waving for Musk and stuff. You know, it's just ridiculous. What you need to do in this environment is sort of stay true blue, stay right down the middle, and don't be too cynical, but, you know, don't fall for, you know, the mainstream media, which has now lost a lot of its position, moving off into astroturfing on the alternative side, and the independent media is growing, and then they just, you know, take over different platforms from that point of view. So it is something to be aware of, not too cynical, because I've seen that too, and we know where that goes. You run around and you just don't trust anything. That's problematic. But I think when it comes to the space aspect, we can see the crossover here. Now, here's a weird thing that happens in the middle of all this. General Van Herk retired. General Van Herk, if you watch this program, you know very well, he is the COG, Continuity of Government, Northcom commander who also runs NORAD. When you get that position, you get all three. And the continuity of government setup with Northcom would run America in the case of an emergency. And Northcom didn't even exist until 9/11. So this is something not envisioned in the Constitution, highly unconstitutional and bizarre. But anyway, they switch these Northcom commanders out once in a while. But I'd say this is a pretty fast turnaround for Van Herk. And General Van Herk had the big, you know, he had the Roswell connection, being part of the bomber group that dropped, you know, the original atomic bomb. It's interesting. I mean, you know, he's many years later, but he's part of that same group, that the 509th, that picked up all the Roswell ruins. So he had his UFO stamp. This guy does too, because the base he was in Florida is known massively for these hardcore UFO incidents. So I've been looking into this commander, but just the fact that they switched him. Now, this is really Biden's guy because Van Herk came along in Trump's era. So this guy is handpicked. Continuity of government program, when you think about it, is one of the things that we've discussed on this program in relation to deep events in the deep state, and how there is always continuity of government personnel involved whenever there's a major deep event like 9/11, you know, the 2008 financial coup d'etat, all kinds of things, Iran-Contra, Watergate, the Kennedy assassination. There was COG personnel involved through the figure of Winston Lawson in the Secret Service details. So you're dealing here with a separate form of government. So whenever they show up on the radar, especially at a time of crisis, you'll remember when they were doing the Chinese balloon and there were headlines like, hey, we're shooting down a UFO and all the rest, which was pretty uncanny headline if you think about it. They didn't have Biden out there. They didn't have the defense secretary out there. They had the Northcom COG commander, and he was given softballs like, do you think it's extraterrestrial? And he would say, I cannot confirm or deny. When you lead the audience like that, that it's a test run for how people would respond to a UFO threat. Now, I think that they'd use a UFO threat to consolidate emergency powers in a way that would make the COVID op look like a picnic. So it is something to be very careful of and on top of. But I would say the combination of that with the Russia story is something else. And it's something really to keep an eye on. Just the fact that this thing floated up out of nowhere and now they're saying it's EMP related. Unless we get our act together in relation to diplomacy with these other countries and also keeping space as a weapons-free zone, as Kennedy had imagined it, as all the presidents had imagined it until we got into, Rumsfeld and this whole kind of dreaming things up of this nature. I mean, I guess Star Wars in the Reagan era constitutes it, but that still was supposed to be a defensive shield. It's a little bit different. But that Strategic Defense Initiative Star Wars program has many lives, and it has continued to grow over the last 40 years since the Reagan administration. So we need to be far more aware that that isn't something that went away. And that and the continuity of government program have grown outside of the public oversight. So I think it makes it particularly dangerous. So the secret space aspect is on the table immediately when you're looking at it. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is Mystery Schools. And we're going to get into these encounters that these individuals who have become masters in the mystery schools, how those masters influence these public mystery school teachers. We're going to take your questions in the second half of the program. It's going to be a short report tonight because we're going to be gearing up to present to you next week a fantastic presentation, Apotheum, the UFO File Wars. And this is something that we shot in a number of locations and has a terrific crew. And we have a lot of very new, exciting information to put on the record for you. So make sure you save the date, which is February 23rd, Friday, 8 p.m. right here. Okay. I am going to read a couple more things about this Russian test, and then we'll jump into the mystery school side. What do you got there?
Well, Vix Tech says, I think we're headed for COG. The Philip K. Dick Film Festival again says, sounds like a false flag for a cyber attack and blame it on Russia. And Kate says, feels like they're building up the UFO threat.
Absolutely. Yeah. Boy, is that really true. And I go with the third one because the UFO threat is the crucial aspect. It's what they've been building up in the background. And they might be able to seize emergency powers through a cyber attack. They have options for how they would do it. But the UFO threat is actually the one that is the most clearly laid out on their side, and the one that they've been moving out through these different news reports, opening up over the last 5 years, allowing the government to trot out these CIA whistleblowers, and really promoting this whole idea of a UFO threat. The UFO threat is dangerous because it triggers NORAD, Northcom action. They trigger COG, and then they assign regional governors, and the Constitution's out the window. That's how dangerous that scenario is. And that doesn't involve them coordinating with another country. They could do all that just, right here without, a skirmish with Russian forces or anything like that. So look for the Biden administration to be extremely desperate, trying to hold on to power through emergency means, since they won't be able to keep it at the ballot box. And I think that makes them very dangerous and unstable, as we saw in France, where Macron rushed through these things, just saying, I need emergency powers. Trudeau, let's use emergency powers against the truckers. They want to push that emergency powers button because the support levels are gone. You can't win elections with 28% of the vote. It's not going to work. So emergency powers are really the only thing they can hang on to. So here now, a little more on this Russian space-based weapon. The White House on yesterday, confirmed that Russia is pursuing anti-satellite capability. That poses a serious national security concern, but is not an immediate threat to Americans' safety. We're not talking about a weapon that can be used to attack human beings or cause physical destruction on Earth, White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters. It's not an active capability, and it has not yet been deployed. So there's something interesting then about Turner putting this on the record and making the Biden administration spill their guts about it. I believe Turner did that in order to trigger off some kind of a let's fund Ukraine piece. But nonetheless, I think there is something also going on with this that they've been keeping an eye on. He also said it would violate the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which bans the stationing of weapons of mass destruction in outer space, and to which Russia is the signatory. Now, this is interesting because I mentioned earlier that Iran, which is Russian-backed, were saying that they were going to Antarctica with missiles and stuff and going to set up, military and scientific resources. So let's crisscross these for a second, and then I'll tell you why Antarctica is so important going forward and why the International Geophysical Year that we've talked about on this program that ran from 57 to 58 but kept going, which is the part that they don't tell you. It wasn't the International Geophysical Year. It was just International Geophysical everything. But IGY was crucial because whatever it is that they discovered there in 58 is reverberating through all of this. And we're going to see that all of the people who were involved, from Lloyd Berkner, Admiral Byrd, and these key people in relation to Antarctica all somehow were involved in huge government changes in the background and the UFO file. In Berkner's case, running the Robertson panel, and also probably becoming a victim of the X-Protect group himself in 1966. So let's go back to this. Iran claims Antarctica. U.S. State Department responds to safety challenge against global treaty. So, these guys are out there saying, well, we can do this. And, we're going to hoist our flag over there and everything else. Also militarizing a non-militarized zone. Now, we have been, along with China, prepping the militarization of space. It's already long been militarized, in fact, but it's still against the actual treaties on the ground. So there's a lot of problems here with how the public can demand of their governments not to go to war in space, because the things that they'll be fighting over, we don't know about because we've been left out of the loop over the past 50 years. That's the crucial aspect. That's why getting at the UFO file piece with the secret space program, classified special access program, that whole thing can change the future dramatically. Because if we don't know what's going on up there, we don't know what threats they're responding to. So we're not part of the decision-making process. They're just like, trust us. We know how to get the emergency powers going. And then the last piece on this, which is what I mentioned about General Gillett, Gregory Gillett, took command now on Monday of the Continuity of Government program. North American Aerospace Defense Command hosts a change of ceremony command on Monday. So General Gillett took command. He takes over for retiring General Van Herk. And this is going to be very crucial because now he's right in the middle. So if they call the emergency, he's the guy who runs America, literally. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is how they've set up the program with Northcom would run America. And they would be in charge militarily, and they would also assign regional governors until they could secure things for an election. Yeah, well, that could be 10 years. Often when there are military coups, they don't like to give back the power either. General Gillett is an Air Force Academy graduate, was commissioned into the Air Force in 89. During his time in the U.S. Central Command, he oversaw combat operations. And he was in Colorado Springs there. They have that incredible COG facility there. Now, contrast that with this Iran Antarctica situation for a moment and think about it, because that also potentially runs us, because Antarctica is all about space too. So we're getting the Russian space story with the Iranian story crisscrossed. Iran's Navy commander, Rear Admiral Sharam Irani, claims the ownership over Antarctica and announced in a September broadcast that they would endanger the South Pole's continent's exclusivity and world security. We have plans to raise our flag there and carry out military and scientific work, declared the Iranian commander. The recent announcement extends equal depths of danger to the international community. Now, this thing came out in September originally, and now the story is hitting everywhere, and so we're all picking it up. But here's what I saw this week that really got me thinking about these, and it again is about Antarctica. So it's a Washington Post story, and it says it was a bucket list cruise to Antarctica. Then plans changed. Passengers on the Norwegian Star demanding answers after their cruise was rerouted. All right, so this story just came out today. And it says, before she set out on a 4-day cruise to Antarctica, Helen Midler, no relation to Bette Midler, dreamed of seeing an iceberg. That's worth a guffaw, at least. Dreamed of seeing an iceberg dotted with penguins as she sailed by the world's southernmost continent. This trip was definitely bucket list, Midler of Melbourne, Australia, said. But then the itinerary changed during the trip, was no longer included on the cruising along the mainland of Antarctica. And the overall amount of time in Antarctica waters was cut. Midler said the voyage was no longer what she and thousands of others aboard had paid for. And an update on the cruise line's app even changed the name to remove Antarctica from the title, she said, and the operator provided only vague explanations. The story goes on with all this weirdness about these people complaining, I signed up for this tour of Antarctica, it got yanked, and I didn't even get told or refunded. And then they go into it and they find out that there are a number of different cruise lines who all changed their Antarctica plans. That story came out today. So this has been going on maybe for a couple of months. But I would say that of all the things that have been going on, the fact that this Iranian story got raised again keeps it in mind for me that somehow the space aspect that's been going on in Antarctica is really what the crisscross is with the Russian space weapons story. So that's how we're looking at this. In the middle of all that, President Trump goes on Truth Social, and you might remember last week I posted a number of images of Professor John Trump from MIT. And this is quite interesting because one of those pictures, which I got from an archive in Alabama, and yeah, I'm sure President Trump has access, but how unusual it was for me to see the very picture that I was showing in President Trump's Truth Social. And there he says, my uncle, and Dr. John Trump at MIT long before it was woke. In fact, yeah. But here is Trump again, putting his uncle front and center. I'm telling you, there's a back to the future quality to this election. And a lot of it has to do with raising the stakes in the background. And the stakes on President Trump's side are the secret technology knowledge that he has, inherited from Uncle John Trump, who we've laid out on this program extensively, was involved with the UFO file by being the protege of Vannevar Bush, and also, as we know, was the person who was called in to review the death ray papers of Nikola Tesla. There's a lot more to that story. We've brought things out. There were some documentaries that were on maybe like 10 years ago that were talking about the oddness of Tesla and all this kind of stuff. And they were missing this crucial aspect that we put on the record about John Trump and all the information that we put out there. And I know there have been some hasty things since, but this is still not very well understood. And this is where the work that we do here in the X series keeps you ahead of things that are happening on the ground, because it's amazing that this kind of messaging is going on and people are not aware of what is going on in relation to Trump on this factor. When it comes to Bobby, there's a huge UFO file connection in the family through John being assassinated by the X-Protect CIA group. Now, the aerospace aspect of the assassination gives us a whole legacy of what we're seeing built up into the 2024 election. The question is if Bobby didn't inherit that information, that is, if RFK Jr. didn't get it from the family, because he does not in public, he has done some asides, waving at the UFO crowd and being like, yeah, we'll get transparency, but he hasn't demonstrated it much as an issue, which I think is interesting. And it's possible that he was kept out of the loop on that. But the question is, if Bobby Kennedy was so deep in that UFO program, and we know that Jack Kennedy was doing everything as president to control this out of control NASA secret space paperclip group, then the question becomes, who inherited the information from President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy Sr. on the UFO file? Because they were great at using human intelligence. So they would have placed that in a number of different ways. And what I would say about this in the 2024 election is that one of the things that Bobby can do is tap into that, because somebody has it vouchsafed, and it's the family legacy piece. And it could become a crucial aspect in this election. The last thing on current events is just that story that I started with, which is the campaign is a mess. RFK Jr. hit with staff exodus over lavish spending and amateurish leadership. Look, you take the headline, you don't fight against it, you don't rail against it or deny it. You just change the crew, because those are the things that are going on the ground. And it's true that there's been a huge staff exodus, and that's because of the lavish spending of the bigwigs at the top of that campaign, while the other people are just kind of, getting by. So the Bobby campaign needs to recapture the magic of the announcement that he was running and what he was running on by having a crew shakeup and going forward. And also, I would say, showing up in places like Detroit, Michigan, or, Camden, New Jersey, or the Bronx. Go to some really hard hit neighborhoods, get out of that celebrity fundraiser thing. It's very, very limited, I would say. That's the kind of thing that Robert Sr. and Jack Kennedy would be doing right now, which is showing that they have the common touch with everyday people, and that they will reach out to the best levels of society and the working class side and bring them up, and those that are below poverty and bring them into the working class. That's what you want to do. But this question that I'm raising about who inherited JFK's information and program against this kind of ex-protect activity around the UFO file, if it's not in the family, that is, if Bobby Jr. didn't inherit it, then who's got it? And this is going to become crucial in terms of what we're looking at going forward here. So everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is Dark Journalist X Report Special, Mystery School Encounters and Space Wars. Going to be taking your questions shortly. I'm going to jump in with some very unusual encounters by these mystery school teachers with mystery school masters that set them off on this course of starting Theosophy, the Fourth Way, Anthroposophy, the Golden Dawn, and others. And it's a fascinating labyrinth of a story. I'm going to try to tell it quickly and then take your questions. And then we'll go here for about another 45 minutes tonight. And as I mentioned before, we are preparing this special for you next Friday. And this is the poster now, Apotheum, the UFO File Wars. I guess you can guess that the UFO file and the battle for the UFO file is right in the heart of it. Next Friday, 8 p.m. And we have some really top talented people working on this. And I did my best to present some very fascinating new information. So don't miss it. Okay. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, you're up.
Johann Wolf says Trump is slowly priming disclosure likely. And Richard Humphrey says, did John Trump work with Dr. Sarbacher?
Well, this is the interesting thing. There's only one major crisscross between John Trump and Thomas Townsend Brown, which is that they were both part of a scientific academy. And my guess is that I've unearthed a lot of things about John Trump that I haven't put out yet. So I'm going to do them all as part of a special, as rolling off of this Apotheum special we do Friday. So I'll save some of those. But what I will tell you is there's a number of things about John Trump and the paperclip group that are going to come out as well. So we're looking at somebody who was at the heart of analyzing the advanced exotic technology aspect, not only in relation to Tesla and the UFO file, but in terms of the German Wunderwaffe. So, these wonder weapons were a big focus, and Eisenhower tapped John Trump over and over again for this type of analysis. It's not widely known, but I have a lot to put on the record there. And, we opened up this conversation about John Trump maybe about 5 years ago. And, I mentioned that when we did it, that the History Channel called me up and they were fascinated with it. And they sat there like, doing the brain drain thing, and then disappeared and made their own slapdash version, pretending this, that they were just discovering all this stuff in a vault. And it's interesting because it's very clear on when Tesla, Trump, and the time capsule came out, which is early 2018. And then their show comes out like 6 months after that, after they had done the brain drain on it. But they didn't get it right anyway. The important thing is the information gets on the record. I'm a big one, a real stickler for giving people credit who put the work out there in the first place. But the important thing is here on the X series, we have the background on John Trump and why his connection with the X technology is so important. And that's why when Trump gets anywhere near the deep state and the establishment, they have a big problem with him. And it's twofold. It's the John Trump problem and it's the Roy Cohn problem. So if you know that the bodies are buried in the deep state on one hand, and you also are on the same level with them on the exotic technology part, they don't want you anywhere near the levers of power. And that's a fact. Just ask, President Kennedy. So we need to be very aware of that functioning aspect in the government and outside of the government is bigger than ever. And they've never been put in their place. I remember when we were doing this back and forth with, the DOD intel official, Chris Mellon, who was trying to go after us on social media. And one of the things that he was trying to say was that the CIA was good now. Stop picking on the CIA because, they had some problems, but they've been, they've really been rehabbed and they're great now. They're honest. Trying to sell that seriously. So we can see that the people who are pushing that false UFO disclosure thing, they're all in lockstep with the Central Intelligence Agency. They don't even hide it. I mean, they had Jim Semivan, who's like in the top CIA directorate, not just like a low-level agent. He's like one of the top guys. And he's the one who launched the To the Stars Academy. I mean, this is a CIA, false disclosure operation. I'm just calling it for what it is. I'm not saying anything that's not true here. It's a fact. You can, peruse through the shows that we've done on it. And there, right in the heart of it all, was billionaire Mellon telling me, lay off of those CIA. Now, it's interesting when you get around this because you have to say to yourself that the situation that we're in relation to the disclosure aspect and the false disclosure aspect becomes more and more important in an election year like this, where they can use it, for these types of emergency situations that we've been talking about. So, but yeah, excellent questions all around. So let's do this. I want to start off with a mysterious figure named Felix. Felix was a gardener. Felix was somebody who you are going to want to know about, because if you're interested at all in the work of the public mystery school of Anthroposophy and the work of Rudolf Steiner in spiritual science, then really, in large part, we owe a lot of it to Felix the gardener. Kind of a nondescript guy. If you saw him in the village, you would just think, there's that gardener with his package of herbs. But it turned out that Felix was a lot more than that. And this is one of the mystery school encounters we're going to be looking at tonight. And in this case, it's Rudolf Steiner's. Felix Kagusky was a very interesting gardener and just a regular kind of working class guy there in the neighborhood where Steiner was going back and forth to university. And Steiner had had a number of challenges as a student and then discovered geometry and become kind of this whiz kid. So they sent him early out to Vienna, and where he was at university. And as he was going on the train, he would meet Felix coming and going, who was harvesting these herbs and then going into Vienna to sell all this stuff and come back. And in Steiner's own words, he talks about their original meeting, which I find interesting. I'm going to read it here directly from his autobiography, which is unfinished. But for those of you who are interested, the book is called Chapters in the Course of My Life. And it is 1861 to 1907 is basically, something that he put on the record, and it takes us through a number of years. And it doesn't get into the larger things about anthroposophy later, but it really gives us the setup. Quote, "It happened that I became acquainted with a simple man of the people. Every week he traveled by the same train to Vienna, which I also used. He collected medicinal herbs in the countryside and sold them to pharmacies in Vienna. We became friends. With him, one could talk about the spiritual world as if with someone who had experience in it. He was an inwardly devout personality in all school matters. He was uneducated. He had read many mystical books, but what he spoke about was quite unaffected by the reading. It was the outflow of a psychic life that contained a very elemental creative wisdom inside of him. One could soon feel he read the books only because he wanted to find what he knew by himself in others as well. But it did not satisfy him. He revealed himself as if, as a personality, he were only the organ of speech for a content of mind that wanted to speak out about hidden worlds. When you were with him, you could look deeply into the secrets of nature. He carried on his back his bundle of medicinal herbs, but in his heart he carried the results he had gained from the spirituality of nature in his collecting. I had seen many people smile who sometime joined as a third party when I walked through Vienna with this initiate. That was no wonder, because his idiom was not understandable from the outset. In a sense, one had to learn his spiritual dialect first. At first, he was not understandable to me either, but from the first meeting, I had the deepest sympathy for him. And so it gradually became to me as if I were with a soul from very old times together, untouched by civilization, science, and intuition of the present, but had an instinctive knowledge of the past brought to me." This is very interesting because Steiner's influence, a lot of his influences are masked, just like Gurdjieff's are. So he can talk to you about all of his scholastic influences, scholarly influences. And when you get around to which mystery school picked up Steiner and gave him this kind of cosmic awakening, it became very, very difficult to see by the way that he was talking about it, because he's bound to keep it secret. Now, there's something that I've talked about, which I refer to as the X Centennial, and that is the 100-year program where Steiner talked about in 1920 how anthroposophy and the mystery schools would have a chance again in a 100-year window, and that window would be pretty substantial. So starting in 2020, that window has been opened for us here in this time. But what's interesting is Steiner himself, in discussing how there are certain mystery school masters, how their personalities can't be released to the public until 100 years after their death. So that centennial idea, again, that he picked up on with anthroposophy, in terms of it having a chance again, there's some process or pattern in the mystery schools themselves that work off this 100-year piece. And he was giving us that there. And it's funny because I've often referred to this 100-year prediction, as it were, of the mysteries opening up again, this X-centennial, as I've called it. And it's interesting because Steiner himself here, in this reference to this mystery initiate who had taught him, who the gardener Felix had introduced to him, the master M. Now, it's very interesting when you get around the mystery schools and you're talking about an initiate, they always refer to them by their initials. They don't actually say the name. Even throughout Ouspensky's work with Gurdjieff, you're going to find him calling Gurdjieff G over and over in the book. And all of the Gurdjieff students, whenever I was around them, when I was first studying this stuff, they would all say G. Nobody said Gurdjieff. And I always thought that was interesting. And I thought, yeah, that's interesting. You know, I guess it's a shorthand, but G. And after a while, if you dig down into the layers of how the mystery schools work, you realize this is how they do it. And so you'll find Henry Alcott, instead of saying Blavatsky this and Blavatsky that, when he's talking about Helena Blavatsky, he just goes HPB. There he is again, using the initials, this time 3. That's how the mystery schools operate. And now we have something else that Steiner gave us, which is this 100-year piece and the reasons for it. I'm going to read his description of why they do that. And it includes psychic attacks, which I'm also going to talk about tonight. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Mystery School Encounters and Space Wars. We've gotten into a lot setting up for this. And you might say, well, all those modern things that are going on in relation to the campaign and space weapons, what does that have to do with the mystery schools? And it's very interesting because the mystery schools are at the heart of this. One of the fascinating things that I've put on the record is the mystery schools, in terms of their political power in America. In Blavatsky's time, say the 1880s, they ran 80% of the political process according to Blavatsky. Think about that. So, you know, you can only imagine their growth, but the person, I think, who gives us more insights on this later is Steiner, talking about how the schools influence the political side, but you have different types of schools. You have very, very dark schools, and you have the very, very light schools, and then you have stuff that's in between. So the right hand, left hand path have been the definitions over time. But those secret societies dominate, and they operate with the same information. So the techniques, you know, are things that are learned over time. And there's a self-serving aspect to certain secret societies, and they have certain goals and aims in terms of the rule of the world. And then there are other groups that you hear about, which are referred to in esoteric literature, the Great White Brotherhood, for example. No connotation to race or anything like that. But that group has been active in moving the culture forward for a number of years. And that's where these figures all come out of. And it seems to me the crisscross really is the Rosicrucian tradition, which is what Steiner is coming out of, and why we had this whole thing about the Western initiators taking over and really being in the spotlight for this period, so that when you got this heavily Eastern twist on Theosophy, it took it off of the path that it was on of a Western tradition, and it just turned it into, you know, a heavily Eastern Indian influenced movement. So it was a kind of a political distortion of a spiritual movement, which is why it had many problems and dissembled. But nonetheless, in the embers of all that, we got things like Anthroposophy, and how many other things came directly out of that. So let's do a little more. I'm going to do a little more on Felix, and then I'm going to go over how this is crucial to the period that we're in, and how the Rosicrucian aspect gets us into meeting the masters. Some of these things that have happened. I'm also going to describe the meeting of on the fourth way schools with those masters as well. See if I can figure all that in. Then we'll take your questions in about 15 minutes.
Okay.
All right. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist X Mystery School Encounters and Space Wars. By the way, if you're new here especially, make sure you sign up for the free newsletter, and that's available at darkjournalist.com. You can pick up on that. We have incredible shows coming up for you, including the Apotheum UFO File Wars special next Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And basically, there's no marketing or anything really in there. It just keeps us with that direct pipeline back and forth because we've just been under heavy, and I mean heavy duty censorship. So make sure you stand up and be counted. Be a part of the newsletter now. And while you're at it, subscribe to the work that we do here. Get behind what we're doing. We've made it very affordable for you to become a member. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, you're up.
Alchemical Wedding says Rosicrucian is solar, hence the 111 years.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah, well, I have a little bit on the founder of the Rosicrucians tonight. And part of the story of his reincarnation being the one who initiated Steiner into the mysteries. There's a couple of different schools of thought around this, but I think that there's a trail around this which takes us directly to Germany and the mystery schools in Germany being crucial. So I'm going to say there's some other comments here that Steiner made about Felix. So I'm going to read these. Now, we've got this idea of this kind of simple man who was very psychic, highly intuitive, and wasn't trying to be impressive or anything like that. But he's leading Steiner. He's getting Steiner's inner spiritual quality out and meeting him at a very young age. I think he meets him at 16. This man, his name was Felix, who had a kind of spiritual connection between his soul and nature, also spoke a great deal about reading, for apart from the medicinal herbs that were stuffing his little house, so to speak, he had a whole library of significant works. The man was very poor, for one earned by the trade in medicinal herbs what one laboriously gathered in the mountains. Very little, extraordinarily little. But this man had an extraordinarily happy face and was very wise. He often spoke of the German mystic and Moser. And this is interesting too, because there's a tie over back there with some earlier mystics, shall we say, and this guy is obviously in that lineage, who made his favorite reading. In the great times of the German spirit, Schiller, Goethe, and those who stood in the background, for behind these spirits stood just the spiritual world, which in their way they overflowed in their writings. Now, it's interesting because what I know about Anna Moser is that a lot of the Nazi high command sought out this guy and his works, and they imitated a lot of his premises. Things like the Reich and all that were named after research that this guy was doing. So we have that mystical tie, and it's weird because when you get that crisscross with Steiner and the Nazis, you've got two groups that are very interested in the occult for two very, very different reasons. And so that's why Steiner gets so much negative attention from the Nazis when they come to power, and why they burn down the Goetheanum, his major center, because they see him as competition, basically. I mean, it's that simple. Not political competition, but, esoteric competition. So it's interesting because Steiner would refer to this guy over and over again as Father Felix. And then he includes him in his mystery plays as a character also. So this guy made an incredible impression upon him. There's a lot of connecting dots, but fundamentally, this is a key quote from Steiner. Felix was only the intermediary for another personality who used means to stimulate the soul of a young man, the regular systematic things with which one has to be familiar in the spiritual world. This personality used the works of German philosophers in order to develop a certain observation from which results ensued, which provided the seeds of my later work. This excellent man was an undistinguished in his daily job, as was Felix. I call him M. M was the master who Felix connected Steiner to. And they ask Steiner, when he is giving these various lectures and things, well, who is this master and all the rest of it? And Steiner said, no one will even know who this person was for 100 years, because that's the way it works with the mystery schools. And he said, especially if they're alive, you wouldn't identify them because they would be subject to instant psychic attack from so many secret mystery groups. Now, that's really putting it where it is. There's a couple of key quotes here I want to read, and then I'm going to go to Steiner's comments about psychic attacks, which I think are crucial. But just to give us an idea of Steiner's knowledge of how the mystery schools operated on the Rosicrucian side, this quote I think stands out for me. In short, it was known in the mystery schools how to preserve the valuable etheric and astral bodies developed by the great initiates. But it would lead me too far afield to speak about this in detail. Suffice it to say that these bodies were kept by the preservers of the mystery schools. So this is why, for example, Saint Germain has an actual record. People know who he was. You can look him up in history. But then he appears in so many different eras. What Steiner's suggesting here is that once they have gone beyond the need of their physical body, basically, they exist as an etheric astral body and can show up anywhere and basically do anything. And in fact, Steiner reference here about the mystery schools being connected with them still gives us an idea that they're used as a library resource, something that you can tap into on the esoteric side, through group meditations and things inside the schools. The preservers of the mystery schools, I think, is maybe one of those key points. Okay, let's go a little bit further on the Steiner lectures, and don't let me forget about non-humans. In about 10 minutes, throw that one back at me, because I buried it here because I want to keep the rhythm going. Okay. So they ask Steiner, well, because he's saying in this lecture series, look, Blavatsky was the real thing, and she was encouraged by genuine Western initiators. She had the mysteries, and she was the figure who could bring it forth because of her extraordinary psychic capability and her ability for psychic instruction. One of the things he was saying is she was an ideal personality and for the schools to work with. Interestingly enough, on the surface, she was known as very abrasive. She was, she rolled her own cigarettes. She was Russian. She was foul-mouthed to keep the wrong people away. And so she has a very interesting setup. I remember Alcott at a certain point has his own encounters with the masters. And of course, Alcott was a very straight ahead kind of guy. He was an ex-general in the Civil War, and he had a great interest in spiritualism, and he started Theosophy with Blavatsky. And he said, is there any reason why she has to have such a bad temperament? And they said, this is just who she is, basically, her point in development. And they also said that her being quick to anger, not an abusive kind of anger, but, the kind of, she was sort of hot-tempered Russian. They said that physically it was keeping her alive. Found that interesting. There was some emotional disposition that she needed in order to keep her vital. So when we run across those people who seem impatient or whatever, we can maybe take a better look at them and say, well, that's just who they are. Yes.
I wonder if there's also a component of sort of in the Zen system, they don't make it easy. There's no ego gratification being involved with that, right? Like they're going to humble you. They're going to smack you with a stick and tell you know nothing.
Oh, it's really true. There's a story about Blavatsky and Ledbetter when he wanted to join, and her sending him that she's like, oh, we're going to go on this cruise. And he thought, oh, it's a lavish theosophical cruise and all this stuff. And she made him walk up and down, the main kind of spot on the boat with a bedpan. And, obviously there was something there, like taking him down a bit. I remember there's a fabulous story about Gurdjieff. this wonderful, wonderful musician named Thomas de Hartmann, who did this incredible music with him and interpreted all the Gurdjieff hymns and things. And the music is remarkable. And de Hartmann had come out of, the conservatory in Russia. Like, he was one of the most famous classical musicians of the era. And he really wanted to join up with Gurdjieff's movement. And what happened was Gurdjieff said, okay, but this is what you need to do. You've got to kind of reset, who you think you are. So I need you to stand in front of that wonderful conservatory and beg for money. So you're going to be out there all day, all afternoon, walking back and forth, spare changing, basically. And, de Hartmann thought he was joking. And then Gurdjieff was like, no, like, if you want to do this, get into, like, wake yourself up by spare changing. And this guy describes in his book this extraordinary situation of going in front of this incredible, symphony opera house and being there with his hat out, and the former people who used to go in there to pay money to see him sort of looking at him like, oh, So it is exactly what you said it is. It's an ego destruction, but you breaking down that ego in order to bring in something real in that sense. So I don't think it was arbitrarily done. I don't think there's any spite in it. It's a test.
How much do you want the truth? What are you willing to sacrifice?
Yes.
You better be willing to sacrifice your pride right up front.
That's true. Well, there's that wonderful story about, Christ and the rich man. And it's this, he's a young rich man. He's inherited all these lands and things like that. And he's like, I want to follow you, master. Tell me what to do. And Christ says, okay, basically give all your stuff away to charity and follow me. Like, we'll get by. And he said, well, my family has developed this, vineyards and all this other stuff. Like, what am I supposed to do? And, he said, well, you can't serve God and mammon, so it's up to you, like, keep on going with your business if that's what you want. And Jesus leaves him there. And it's interesting. He makes a comment to one of his disciples, and he says, it's difficult. It's tough. It's tougher for a camel. No, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. Now, I think that, that exaggerates the thing. I don't think the interpretation should quite be that, being rich means you don't get into heaven. That's ridiculous. But I think we get the point, which is it's a lot harder when you invest yourself solely as a material focus, in that way, that if you have the opportunity, you're dealing there, with an archangel incarnate, and you're like, I'd rather keep my fancy villa. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this Blavatsky story. And so Steiner gets asked on a number of occasions, basically, what do you like? So you really are saying that Blavatsky was a master after all? And his answers are very straight up, that he does regard her as someone who's a genuine spiritual personage and a very rare individual, highly evolved psychic, and just, one of the most advanced. And that her vision of the spiritual worlds were something that couldn't be done anymore in our era. They were the kind of things that were done in the Greek mysteries and things. So what Steiner says is, the fact is that Blavatsky was prompted from a certain direction, and as a result of this, she produced all the things that are written in Isis Unveiled. Now, Isis Unveiled has a different character than the Secret Doctrine. Isis Unveiled is much more of a Western initiatory stream, so it's more of the Rosicrucian piece. The Secret Doctrine is way more, comes 10 years later, and it's far more, it's fantastic. It's a wonderful, wonderful work, both philosophy and science, but it is much more influenced by that Eastern initiatory tradition. So then he goes on to say, but by various machinations, Blavatsky for a second time fell under outside influences, namely of Eastern esoteric teachers propelled by cultural tendencies of an egoistic nature. From the beginning, a biased policy lay at the basis of the things they wished to achieve through Blavatsky. It included the desire to create a kind of sphere of influence, first of a spiritual nature, but then in a more general sense. of the East over the West by providing the West's spirituality, or lack of it, if you like, with Eastern wisdom. That is how the transformation took place from the thoroughly European nature of Isis Unveiled to the thoroughly Eastern nature of Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine. And that is Steiner speaking in 1923, putting this on the record and saying, you know, we have to get our understanding about Theosophy, that it was clear that it was a real, genuine initiatory tradition, and it lost its way and became manipulated. And part of that was through the psychic occult imprisonment of Blavatsky, which that avenue of secret society mystery schools had decided she needs to be, this is somebody who needs to be controlled. And so they took her dramatically off course. When she had approached them to join, and she had shown them that she knew the secrets inherent in the mystery schools here in America. And because she was Russian, because she was a woman, and also because they considered her a wild card, they didn't allow her to join. And they used the Constitution to deport her, according to Steiner, which I find interesting because I'm not sure what was in the Constitution that he's referring to, but nonetheless, it's quite fascinating that he said it. But the fact that they were so afraid of her, and that at a certain point she said to them, look, I know all your secrets, then I'm going to work with the Paris mystery schools, and, they'll know everything that I know, plus what you know. So it's up to you. And then they were like, this is too much of a problem. And they did something that they don't do, which is they created this false psychic wall around her visionings. And they used a group of their psychics internally in the American secret society. So they became kind of more evil through this interaction, because the mystery schools, as I said, tend to have a character of evolving society. They tend to be very light-based and influenced. They're working from a higher level. So this group of mystery schools, they were coming in from this different side. They were too close to the political process in America. They were on that left-hand path. Now, the Rosicrucian aspect, I think, which is very interesting, when we get into the initiatory master that initiated Steiner, who he refers to as M, and how M changed everything for him, basically, and brought him into this, spiritual vision. So we have some people now doing the research. It's coming out that this M character, who they found is associated with Felix, actually is somebody who was very deep in the Rosicrucian teaching. What's interesting is the same character, if they're right, and I'm not saying that they are, because Steiner's not here to tell us, but that's the same character who initiated Blavatsky into the mysteries under the Rosicrucian wing before she went into this different direction. So we're looking at somebody from a very powerful level. But here's what Steiner has to say about how the Rosicrucian stream works, and reincarnation's in here. So we have a couple of different things. So I'm going to get through this, and then we're going to take your questions, and then we'll tell you about our special next Friday, and we're out.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing out there?
Good.
What do you got?
Synthetic Nature says she wasn't grumpy. She was just drunk. She hit the vodka pretty hard. What about that?
Well, I don't think that, she was somebody who held back. But neither was Gurdjieff, So, and Gurdjieff, although he was born in Armenia, he lived in Russia for, how many years? So let's say in that period, it was a hard drinking culture. Let's see here. What else do you have?
I love this question. Fuber Fighter says, has something taken the magic out of our time?
Well, remember, so the magic would be there. It would just be latent. So it would be covered over. So, nothing's been taken away. It's been blocked, right? Just like they're trying to block the sun out.
Obscured.
Yes. Yeah. So certainly it exists, and it can be tapped into. That's an individual thing. No culture can actually give you that. It's nice when there's a culture that is that developed that when you wake up into it, you're just part of the stream of that culture. But nonetheless, even under very dark circumstances, people can find themselves highly spiritually
attuned to magic. I'm not gonna let you get away from that one. So how would
It
we
remind me about non-humans.
Okay, I will. How do we tap into our inner magic? What's the best way to do it?
Well, I go with the magnetic center idea. So, for example, there's only so many things you can learn from books, but books and your favorite documentaries, things of this nature, performances, presentations, they tap into what, and this is a fourth way term about magnetic center that Ouspensky talks about. So when you cultivate your magnetic center, it's a certain type of learning. So if on the deeper levels, it's experiential, right? But nonetheless, you need to cultivate that magnetic aspect so you attract those influences to yourself. So when you are engaged in that kind of, reading is a very, very important experience. So I think there's a lot of different ways that people can tune in. A lot of people, from gardening to art, there's so many different aspects where I see people get into that inspiration zone. And so it's highly individual, but there's no question that whatever cultivates that magnetic center in you is where it's headed.
Can I add one thing?
Go for it.
I think it's really important to intend it. It's not just going to happen magically, right? It is.
Yeah.
This is something I
Yes.
tuned into today. I always pray before the show, and that if there's something you want to experience that you have not been experiencing, and you haven't been specifically praying for it, cultivating it within yourself, thinking it's just going to manifest on its own, you're not going about things correctly. So if you want happiness,
yeah,
you need to intend happiness. If you want more magic, more sparkle in your life, you need to intend it. It needs to be part of your intention, your prayer, your focus to draw it to you, to magnetize it to you.
Oh, that's no question. Well, in the CAYCE work, you have thoughts or things, right? And mind is the builder. So there's an instant responsibility you can take for your own thinking. And that doesn't mean sugarcoating the world around you, but it's to kind of lift up your vision. And I think that works under almost any circumstances. So when you have the luxury to think of it, to do it, that's even better. Okay. So speaking about Rosicrucians reincarnating in the stream of the mysteries is something that Steiner is doing in this book, The Secret Stream, which I highly recommend, a series of lectures. Now, this is straight from the book. Between birth and death, we live on Earth. Between death and a new birth, we have a certain connection with other planets. In Theosophy, you will find Kamaloka described. This human sojourn in the soul world is a time during which we become inhabitants of the moon. Then, one after another, we inhabit Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Then we inhabit the far reaches of the cosmos. It is correct to say that between two earthly incarnations, we are incarnated spiritually on other planets. Today, humankind is not yet developed enough to recall, while incarnated, these experiences between death and a new birth. Although people today cannot remember what was experienced on Mars, for example, they still contain Mars forces. Though they are unaware of them, it's justifiable to say, I am not only an inhabitant of Earth, I contain forces that also include something acquired that I acquired on Mars. Let me consider a man who lived on Earth after the Copernican worldview. Okay, so he goes on to talk about Giordano Bruno. And it's interesting because we know from various theosophical literature that Annie Besant was the reincarnation of Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake for his observations about the planets. And so you can imagine the fire in Annie Besant when she comes back and, She is someone who leads the marches for rights for workers, for girls in the streets of London. She works for Home Rule for India with Gandhi. She works for Home Rule in Ireland. This is somebody who is a spiritually political, advanced person. So then let's take a few things into account. The high tide of materialism arrived in the 19th century, according to Steiner. Here's what he says. Many things could be presented only in a very incomplete way. In 1851, the problem of the soul's immortality was solved by Windeman through the idea of reincarnation. Now, here are the mystery schools using different personalities to put ideas out. And they are rolling reincarnation out. They're saying, you know what? People are going to need to know about this because of this overwhelming tide of scientific materialism. The forces radiating from the etheric body of Christian Rosenkreuz, who is the founder of the Rosicrucian mysteries. And he goes back to the 14th century, and this is where all of this comes from. Continued during the 19th century. So he's saying the forces radiating from the etheric body of Christian Rosenkreuz continued during the 19th century. A renewal of Theosophy came about in 1899. The little Kali Yuga had run its course. That is why the approach to the spiritual world is easier now, and spiritual influence is possible to a far greater degree. Think about this. Think about the question that we had earlier when somebody said, has somebody sucked up all the magic in our current time? So these things, doors open and doors shut, on a regular basis. But here is Steiner going out on a limb and saying, you know what? In this period, 1899, something had lifted. Things had opened up so that these truths could pour through. So looking for those opportunities and going through, the kind of dry spells that, we certainly have been through a number of those. Try the terror decade, that started off the 21st century, and then all the things that they've been up to. There may be here that window that's opening with that whole X-centennial idea, which comes directly from Steiner and Theosophy and the CAYCE work and others. They talk about a period where it's going to be crucial to open the mysteries back up. And when we think about it from that point of view, what Steiner is saying here is there was this kind of iron grip on sensibilities, and then things opened up. He points out this year, 1899, that a little Kali Yuga had run its course. And what's a good description of Kali Yuga?
Don't ask me.
Well, Kali Yuga, as I understand it, is like this dark period that comes to us out of the Vedas, where they talk about, it's almost like a dark ages, and then it passes. We go through the Kali Yuga and we get opportunities again. So we have to remember a lot of this stuff is cyclical. So here's what he has to say. Until now, an esoteric Rosicrucian preparation was essential, but the mission of the 20th century is to enable this etheric body to gain enough power to work exoterically, that is, in the public world. So you have esoteric and exoteric. Those who are affected by it will be granted Paul's experience on the road to Damascus, the big awakening. Up until now, too, this etheric body was active only in the Rosicrucian school. This is Christian Rosenkreuz's etheric body he's discussing. But in the 20th century, increasing numbers of people will be able to experience its effect. Through this, they will experience the appearance of Christ in the etheric body. It is in the work of the Rosicrucians that makes possible the etheric vision of Christ. Now, he says, and this is quite fascinating, everything that is revealed in the name of spiritual science is made stronger by the etheric body of Christian Rosenkreuz. Those who make spiritual science known permit themselves to be overshadowed by this etheric body, which can work on them both while Christian Rosenkreuz is incarnated and while he is not physically incarnated, because he's still reincarnating. The Count of Saint Germain was the exoteric reincarnation of Christian Rosenkreuz in the 18th century. This name, however, was given to others as well. Consequently, not everything said of Count Saint Germain here and there, and the outer world applies to the true Christian Rosenkreuz. Christian Rosenkreuz is incarnated again today. Now, this is interesting because some people who read Anthroposophy and study it believe that it was the reincarnation of Christian Rosenkreuz, who started the Rosicrucian movement, who initiated Steiner into the mysteries. That's where you get Anthroposophy. And that initiation happened when Steiner was 36 in this picture. So we have Steiner giving us a lot of hints here when it comes to his interactions with the master and the mystery schools on this. And Steiner would go on to complete his mission of Anthroposophy. So we do have an incredible, vibrant sort of resurgence around this idea of Anthroposophy bubbling up under the surface. And it's come through things like the X series, like the work of G.G. Young. It's there, and people tap into it. And terms like the eighth sphere and Ahriman seem like something that's almost buried in their subconscious somewhere. So I want to say that I think that this is that whole excentennial piece that we were talking about. The person that they believe, a lot of these people believe, is M, the master, is Eloise Melander. And he was one of the real kind of major Rosicrucian secret groups operated out of Germany. And that would be a picture then of Steiner's mystery school master, Eloise. And he was a simple weaver and factory worker from southern Germany. He remained mostly unknown to the world during his lifetime. His students all kept his identity secret. Only his inner circle knew who he really was. Steiner said the identity of this master could be revealed in 100 years. And so a number of people who study along this line have been pointing to Melander. It's very likely that he is the initiate in question. But like I said, Steiner's not here to confirm it for us. I do find it very interesting, but when we look at the work of Steiner and what he was able to accomplish and how it was all set up for the 21st century and beyond, and when you read some of that material, talking about New Jupiter, talking about Ahriman, the eighth sphere, and the development of this kind of virtual world, and how Ahriman would be kind of grabbing us by the consciousness and, really sort of interrupting the natural course of spiritual evolution. This is crucial. And we have to really say that Steiner accomplished something. I believe that he spent 4 decades trying to put on the record the piece about the eighth sphere and the challenge of Ahriman in the technological age of the 21st century. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Mystery School Encounters and Space Wars. And we're going to take your questions here momentarily. I'm going to leave a lot on the cutting room floor, but this is a setup for a whole mystery piece that we're doing on this X Centennial that will come out in March. We'll do a series of episodes. So, but it's great to have so many of you here. Before I go any further, I want to remind you, especially if you're new, sign up for our free newsletter at darkjournalist.com. It keeps us in touch, and it lets you know about the amazing things that we have coming up for you: interviews, X-series episodes, documentaries, mind-blowing presentations like the one we're doing on Friday, which we put a lot into production-wise and new information. This is going to be something very special. Mark the date, Friday, February 23rd. And this is our very, very special presentation documentary. So, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Mark A says, don't forget to talk about non-humans.
Oh, shoot.
Are you ready for that?
My lordy, the time doth fly. You give me another question, actually.
Okay, well, I'll give you a comment. Shamanist Anamkara says, Steiner has said that for the first time, humans can have a first stage of initiation through study of spiritual science like anthroposophy. Previously, one needed a living teacher.
Yeah. Again, this is all very interesting because it's either... I think that we have arrived at a point Steiner pointed out two very important things. One, that the teachings couldn't be so secret. It's not that there wouldn't be some aspects of secrecy, but that the secrecy aspect would hold things in too few hands when the culture was in this peril and being kind of, overridden by these harmonic forces. And now with the industrial age into the super technological AI age, humanity would be at the mercy of some of the worst kind of scientific materialism, and which is exactly what we've seen. What do they want to do? They want to clone slaves and destroy genders and all the rest of it. And listen, don't think that there isn't a huge occult aspect to shredding the definition of genders, especially when you realize in most mystery work, when you are a male, your etheric body's female. So, and vice versa. So if you start messing around, and I'm not talking about, somebody who's dealing with trans issues and things. I'm talking about the government World Economic Forum push to transform people into this, whether they like it or not. Then you're getting into a totally different territory, though, because you're messing with the actual etheric rhythm of how the planet operates, how the spiritual evolutionary track operates. So you can see how this information gets out. There is a possibility for dangerous misuse of mystery principles coming out. So it's a weird balance. This is not like government holding secrets type thing. This is, the people who kind of abuse the mysteries in that sense on the secret society side and use it for domination and things. The public needs to be aware in order to be able to shield itself against those types of forces. That is really, a big mission of what we do here on the Dark Journalist show as well. Okay, non-humans, did you say?
Yes.
Well, now, let's go back to September 17th, 1924. I can hear the go back in time music in my head. And we're in Dornach, Switzerland. And Steiner is doing a lecture on the apocalypse. And he says, I've already shown that the apocalypse is built up on the number principle, one of the occult principles, from a certain viewpoint from my explanations about fundamental rhythmic numbers in the universe. And he goes off to talk about the number 7 and how it's so crucial to this era, and how all kinds of things in the universe are arranged in accordance with the number 7. It's interesting because Tesla's work around numbers as well. I'm going to leave that for our deeper numerological explorations. However, the non-human aspect in the apocalypse lectures is quite interesting, and it goes something like this. In anthroposophical lectures, I've often referred to a particular point in the 19th century in this connection, namely the beginning of the 1840s. I said that the beginning of the 40s is a significant incision into the development of the civilized world from a spiritual viewpoint. It is the culmination of scientific materialism, as it were. Everything that is connected with materialism was already decided in 1843 and 1844. I think this is a fantastic point, and here's how I'll relay this. Steiner is saying people are looking more and more at what's coming in the future. How is this sort of big technology materialism thing coming down? What Steiner's saying is, look, all this stuff was decided in 1843 and 1844. So it opens up, it's a key, it's like a clue saying, what was it that happened in that period? And there are political movements that got started there. But one of the fascinating things is that this concept, heavy duty scientific materialism concept, was born out of the German scientific community in that period. And as I understand it, the scientist who put it forward was very young, I believe 24 years old. And it basically carried with it the idea that if it couldn't be weighed and measured, then it didn't exist, as it were. And so it was a complete shift from this kind of church spirituality dominance of the culture into this other thing. And we've seen that split going on. And that's why I think the concept of spiritual science is so crucial. Now, Steiner is talking about, in relation to the apocalypse and all the things in the Bible about the trumpet sounding for this, the trumpet sounding for that, that we're in the era of these trumpets sounding. I'm going to come back to this in full when we do a series of programs in March about this existential idea. But he does say the sixth angel began to blow his trumpet at the beginning of the 1840s. And it will continue to sound around the world until the events of which I spoke yesterday that end the 20th century, when the seventh trumpet will begin to sound into the 21st century. Now, he's talking about this as an incredible clash of forces. And that's why in the apocalypse, it is being looked at in this way from a mystical point of view. Then he mentions that he's talking about how they desire certain types of increases in the population by people who are politically minded and also by people who think they are free thinkers. First of all, this is not quite correct because the statistics are based on errors. And he goes into this whole thing about what they want more people for in this period. It's just the opposite now. They're getting rid of people. In this sense, there is a kind of surplus of human beings who are already appearing in our time who have no egos. I want to point out that egos here has to be taken in a certain type of way. What it means is individuality. So the whole concept of NPC, for example, keep this in mind as we go along, who are not really human. This is a terrible truth. They walk around and are not incarnations of an ego. No individuality, right? They enter into the physical line of heredity and receive an etheric body and an astral body, just like all the rest of us do. In a certain way, they are equipped with an harmonic consciousness, and they look like humans if one doesn't look too closely. But they are not human beings in the full sense of the word. This is a terrible truth, which is present. It's a truth when the apocalyptor speaks about the plague of locusts during the trumpets epoch. He's referring directly to human beings. So he's giving us, some aspects of Revelation and seeing through the apocalypse in the Bible, and he's giving us the esoteric point, saying what he's seeing. He speaks about the plague of locusts during the trumpets epoch. He's referring directly to human beings. Here again, one can see how good the apocalyptor's vision is. For such men in their astral body look exactly the way that he describes them, like etheric locusts with human faces. One definitely has to think about such supersensible beings in this way, and priests must know about such things, for a priest is a minister. Hence, he must be able to find the words for everything that happens to a soul. One will certainly realize this when one runs into these human beings. A priest has to know, for all there is fellowship among men with regard to such matters. People with normal souls suffer through their association with such persons who really go through the world like human locusts. So we can see Steiner here is bringing us into our cosmology, an esoteric way of looking at these things. But he's actually suggesting on the spiritual evolutionary track of human development that there are beings here that aren't coming in the same way. They aren't fully loaded with an etheric, astral, and human spiritual consciousness. They just are coming equipped with an astral body, an etheric body, and Ahriman's consciousness. And then he goes on to speak about them almost in a sympathetic fashion. And far from saying, we need to eradicate these non-humans from out of our midst, he's basically saying, we need to kind of tread carefully because they are puppets in all of this. So it gets into a kind of a deep cosmology where he's referring to what we're seeing laid out. And we start to see them coming up with the idea of merging people in with the machinery and AI and all the rest of it. You can very clearly see, when you study mystery knowledge, what you understand is the seat of the soul is anyone who studies all these people who study esoteric matters are aware of this, that the silver cord of where the soul resides is in the pituitary gland, the link with the pineal gland, and then the Leydig centers in the body. So you can't take that out. That's part of the human evolutionary track. That's what makes you a human being on the spiritual side. So you have a physical, emotional body, and then you have this whole psychic spiritual connection. When that goes away, if you don't have that, if you're made, I can make a being full on, I can make a clone, I can't give it a soul. So therefore, it's a different being. So Steiner isn't saying we need to look down our nose at these things. What he's saying is that the problem that we face going into the 21st century that we're coming into is we're going to be interfacing with beings that aren't human, and that we're not aware of it in society. And I think that, the fact that they are very easy marks for this harmonic, dark astral consciousness is very interesting when you get into what he's trying to present there. And sure, there's a cosmology that's attached to it, a spirituality, an esoteric viewpoint, yes. But remember, Steiner's also been incredibly good at picking out the technological aspects we would face in this era. So he's telling us, this is a terrible truth I'm laying out for you. And this is shortly before his own death as well. So it may have been something where he's facing a certain point in his life and he's saying, I need to get this information out because, the kind of culmination of my work is people being available to this information. So I think that we hit upon a very deep track here with Steiner, and it goes deeper. I'm going to describe a very interesting encounter with the masters on the Gurdjieff side before we're done tonight, but I'm going to turn it all over to Miss Olivia now, and we'll take your questions here for about 20 minutes.
Okay. You really hit on something in the last 10 minutes. Okay. Ray Morgan says, no ego people who are giving up themselves to hive mind. Steiner said that. Ryan Perella says, jingoism is scary. Sounds like a locust mindset. Scary how emotions can override logic. We ought to learn to nullify these effects. James Douglas says, parasitical entities that thrive on a puppet master. And Scarlet Fire says, are some of our so-called leaders now non-human?
Yeah, that's a real problem. I think this is quite fascinating from a number of different levels. And when we're looking at it, what we're seeing is over and over again, the culture itself has been trying to put us into, it's trying to introduce the alien thing from this really kind of weird, there was a point in time when aliens were being presented and it was like, oh, we may have neighbors out in space. And it was kind of a scientific exploration mixed with the spirituality almost. Now it's like a weird threat thing, and it's mixed in with government power, centralization, money, so it's taken on an illness all its own. That's just one area. Look at what medicine has turned into and the horrors there, and all the good doctors, who would want to move the culture forward as far as medicine and things are concerned. Just think about how we used to think of people, medically, even 50 years ago versus what is going on now. Not that there aren't advances made, but it's this, entrainment to a central pharmaceutical authority mixed with a bunch of underlings and their incredible political power to try to rule the world through the WHO. I mean, it's an illness, it's a deep illness, and we've seen it in leadership structures, and and it goes for military power as well. What's interesting is people kind of expect it in a way when it comes to the military. You don't really expect it when it comes to the medical thing. So that's the great, sort of deception coming in through the back door, I think, that people weren't prepared for with what's been going on. So, but I do feel that this is something else that we need to add, and it's not a kind of a witch hunt thing in your consciousness. Like, how can I point out that, this celebrity I don't like isn't human? You see a lot of these types of things. It's not that. It's to be aware of the environment that you're in so that you can discern better what's happening. And this would be an incredible thing for us on a day-to-day basis to think, oh, we're operating side by side with these kind of harmonic agents who unbeknownst to them, have just been kind of groomed for this and rolled in on the human side, and they have things very deeply in common with us, like an astral body and like an etheric body, but they're missing this spiritual aspect. So, they're going to have some kind of evolutionary track there, which is why I think Steiner was putting it on the record. No, you're not going to be in a position to judge or prosecute these types of people, but you have to be very aware of them because they're almost unconscious puppets in the middle of all this.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I don't think it's almost. They are unconscious.
Yes.
And which is why they're susceptible to being taken over, like in the Matrix, by an agent. They're empty vessels.
Right.
And, but we all have to guard against that. That's the nature of Maya, right? We're
Yes.
here in ignorance and fear, and we're all susceptible to propaganda and influence, external influence, and we have to constantly reset our own compass, right? So we are directing our own thoughts, our attitudes, our fate, right? Because if we leave ourselves open, any of us can be taken over.
Oh, that's absolutely true. It's whether it's one of these types of beings or just a regular human being, you're going to face that challenge. It's fascinating too, because the whole Gurdjieff work is about humanity when it's awake, is spiritually able to do and things of this nature. But if you're asleep, you're just at the whim of any kind of materialistic force that's going on. One quick thing to kind of round out the non-human session. We are going to return to this.
There's no end to this.
This is Steiner again, quote. This is from his lecture, one of his last. These human beings display the nature and essence of human beings fairly closely until their 20th year. The intellectual or mind soul only emerges around age 20 in a human being, and this makes it possible for the ego to live out its life on Earth. Anyone who says that one shouldn't act in a sympathetic way to such ego-less, individuality-less people, since they won't incarnate again because they have no individuality, is very much mistaken. He would also have to say that one doesn't behave in a sympathetic way towards children. One must decide what is really inside such men in each individual case. This is very interesting because here, finally, we got an important thing, which is the term ego, which I think is being mistranslated here. Steiner himself inserts individuality-less people. And so he's speaking about that spiritually individual quality. And he's also saying these beings, when they come in, won't reincarnate because obviously they're the product of something that isn't in the organic human stream. They're something else. Now, I can very easily imagine that in laboratories and things like that, these elite groups have been working and developing certain types of clone or hybrid individuals. And this goes back to CAYCE's work around the things, the Atlantean things, and how the scientists in that period used human matter, animal matter, and their scientific technology and created these cyborg slaves. Now, think about that in terms of the period that we're in. If CAYCE in that case were just having a fantasy or, whatever it was, boy, he's really nailed down what was going on here in development in the 21st century. But is Steiner pointing to this saying, well, they're not going to reincarnate. They're kind of inhabitants of the eighth sphere. And they're going to be created and they'll have astral and etheric bodies, but they are not going to, just because of the fact that they're physical, they will, but they're not going to have a soul life beyond this lifetime, and they're not individualities. I think that Steiner is going deep before he leaves us in that one and giving us a lot to think about, and also encouraging us to be sympathetic to the whole concept, I think is quite remarkable as well. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Chris Lothian. Does he say how these beings originated? They must have arisen from somewhere. What was God's intention creating them?
Well, again, when you think about the Atlantean things, for example, they were brought about through the incredible powers of the Atlanteans who had scientific abilities, much like our own scientists do now. So they could have been brought about through somebody else's intention, somebody else's will. So, God provides us with all the materials for things, but how we use them is different. Developing this artificial intelligence concept, and then the whole things that they do with, meta AI and all these types of platforms, which are really in their infancy publicly, but they've been working on in the background probably 70 years, at least 50. So, we find ourselves going into very strange territory there. Now, what's fascinating is we've got the UFO file aspect on one hand. We've got these unusual beings, these individuality-less beings that Steiner is talking about. And then we have what are known in mystery circles as elementals. Then you also have, from the mystery side, discarnates. So you have a number of different beings crisscrossing around human experience. But the beings that he's referring to who are egoless are physical human beings, everyday beings like you and I, except that they lack this spiritual side. And they are creations. They're sort of born with an harmonic consciousness, leading me to believe that there is something about the idea of cloning cyborgs and all the rest of it that's related to what he's saying. Although he's talking in 1924 like they're already there. So, it's going to take some ferreting out exactly of what he's getting to. But I think once we lose the ego, interpretation there and just go into the individuality part, I think we're in more in the ballpark. Yes.
And that Christ, DJ Casey's readings mentioned 1/3 of creation was made by fallen angels.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And there's all sorts of things about the Cain and Abel lines and how they're two totally different lines. And you have these threads that there are groups that are operating side by side with what we assume is just one whole human family. So this is obviously a period of becoming aware, and our consciousness has been aimed out. Oh, there's somebody coming in with a spaceship who's visiting us. Well, I'll tell you, they're, as far as I can tell, there are off-world civilizations visiting here. Yeah. However, they've replaced all of our attention around these other things with that, right? So it's just this thing, or they start referring very vaguely to interdimensional, like without really any. Are you working from a mystical classification with that? So there's a lot of definitions that are required, and then it's an effort to get people who are intuitively gifted enough to see what's actually happening. But one thing is for sure, which is the culture on the surface does not display a natural ability and curiosity to the level where it would be able to assimilate the larger truth around this on one side. And then on the other side, they're being fed so many lies that you could lay out something like a false alien threat or whatever, and the things that the government's trying to do with creating these false entities. So it's going to be quite a minefield separating the things out. But I think that the mystery school line, mystery school language, bringing it out to the public means it has to be up there for our consideration, for our awareness level when we're dealing with it. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Mystery School Encounters and Space Wars. We're going to take a couple more of your questions. I'm going to read a very quick Gurdjieff story, and then we are going to take two more questions, and then we're done.
Okay.
Remember, our Apothium special is coming up. It's next Friday at 8 p.m. We've worked long and hard on this to bring it to you with a great team, and it's fantastic UFO file wars, lots of new, powerful information, and just, something that we really are working hard to bring to you and spread the word that it's coming up. And if you didn't guess, it's got some powerful very, very powerful crossovers with the things that are happening now versus what's been set up here over the past 60 years on this line of the UFO file wars since the Kennedy administration. And that is Vannevar Bush in his glory there. And he was the mentor of John Trump and others, of course, over at MIT. So lots going on there, and make sure that you're a part of it because we want to see you there. Okay. Gurdjieff quote time. This is pretty interesting. Actually, I'm going to go to the Ouspensky quotes because the Gurdjieff part is integrated into what he's saying here anyway. And of course, this is the Fourth Way School. And Gurdjieff is the bald one. And Ouspensky is the one looking off into the cosmos through spectacles there. Fascinating philosopher mixed with a fascinating mystery school teacher, and lots of incredible information that they brought forth. It's a very unusual quote about history and recurrence, and he's referring to different timelines here. And then he talks about the same type of thing of these individuals who aren't really on the same level as we are. I wanted to crisscross this with the Steiner thing, and we'll go into this deeper in a later episode coming up in March. But nonetheless, this is, by the way, what I found out about the questions in this section is Krishnamurti used to show up to a lot of Ouspensky's meetings. And it's interesting because Krishnamurti, of course, came right out of Theosophy, and then they made the whole order for him. And he said, I'm out of here. I'm doing my own thing. And he's kind of a very interesting figure, but he's in here asking a lot of these questions. And this is one of the questions that he asks. I do not understand between change of state and change of circumstances. So they're talking about recurrence. And so Steiner's laying out this, Ouspensky's laying out this Groundhog Day thing about people come back into the life that they've been living. And he says, if a person ceases to be born in his particular period, what happens to all the other lives with which he comes into contact? And Ouspensky answers, this is one of the very difficult problems to understand. As far as we can see in this theory, one cannot start being born at once. Being born is also a process like everything else. One fades out little by little. Fading out does not produce any big effect. Some people can fade out, others have to remain, such as people connected with historical events and things like that. They are in a most unpleasant position. They just turn round and round, and most of them are quite dead. Is it then impossible for great people in historical movements to escape from life? It's Krishnamurti again. Ouspensky, in most cases, it's too late for them to escape. They are dead already. They are almost losing their bones on the way, but they have to continue to exist and turn around in reality. This is one of the mysteries of life, that it is governed by dead people. Then someone says, I don't see why big historical figures are so important that they must continue to recur when they become dead. Why wouldn't it be easy to find substitutes for them? And Ouspensky answers, easy for whom? Evidently, they fit into some condition and so continue to go round in the same way even if they die and people take them for living beings. Perhaps it is their chief feature that they are dead, for they cannot make a mistake. They do exactly the same things over and over again. He's talking about somebody recurs, they were the king of England in the last recurrence, and here they are again. They have to walk through this role. Then Krishnamurti says, well, you speak of dead people recurring. I thought that essence could not die. And then he gives an explanation about that. And then Krishnamurti kind of asks the ultimate question, and he says, well, are most people dead?
Great question.
This question was much discussed in our group in St. Petersburg. Some thought that most people were dead, but I was always against this. Everybody is asleep, but even in life, you find pleasant people who may not work through laziness, lack of opportunity, or something else. But they are not dead. How can dead people influence sleeping people? In comparison with sleeping people, they are very strong because they have no conscience and no shame. What makes ordinary people weak? Conscience and shame. Besides, If people are asleep, anything can happen to them. They can be stolen out of their body. All people in life are asleep, but not all are dead.
Whoa.
Now, there's a lot in what Ouspensky is saying there, and it crisscrosses a lot with what Steiner is saying, because he's saying, look, these individuals, they operate just like we do, but they're not actually full beings. They, they're on a recurrence pattern. They're just there. And he's also saying that, basically sleeping people are under the influence. So sleeping people, you're into your ordinary day-to-day life and you've checked out from reality. But these other beings have something in common with what Steiner was referring to with the lack of individuality beings. So there's something that both of these streams are trying to put forward. And again, in the middle of it, Krishnamurti, who was in Theosophy, Ouspensky, who's in the Fourth Way School, Steiner out of Theosophy, something around these schools is feeding some message in about some other group that's going to be side by side with humanity. And it doesn't sound like aliens to me. It sounds like something created either on an occult level or on a scientific level. And with that, Miss Olivia, we'll take the last question tonight.
No, you did not say the last question. You said last couple
last
of questions.
two. Okay, yes.
Okay, all right. So Michael Snow says, what's DJ's opinion on the Belial group having been infiltrated by the eighth sphere and the Ahrimanic presence? Are our current crop of so-called leaders reincarnations of Belial spirits? And along with that point, Don Neway says, so a dead person could become U.S. president?
Well, makes you wonder about the current one, because he seems pretty checked out to me. Well, here's the thing about Belial. Belial comes directly out of that Atlantean period. So in CAYCE's work, and I think it's important with CAYCE, I have him here somewhere. Yeah. You have a couple of things going on, because the Amelius group in Atlantis is perfected because they've split their genders. So they're male and female. They were not united in an androgyne. And Amelius is the one leading them into this kind of getting away from being locked into being thought projections into Atlantis. And that whole description sounds very much to me like scientific tampering. So, but what the Amelius group is doing is giving them the opportunity to have a full life and develop, and putting humanity's spiritual evolution back on track. So what Amelius does is he develops the 2-eye technology to interface all these priestesses and people in Atlantis with the outer saintly realm through the crystals. That's CAYCE's hardcore story about Amelius, and Amelius leading the souls. And what happens is there are groups inside of that who are very imitative, and they imitate Amelius and the Amelius group. And there's a different force that's animating them, and that's the Belial group. And they start to realize that although the technology can be used for spiritual advancement, it is a tremendous tool for technological advancement to dominate the other side, or anyone who down here on Earth developing as well. So CAYCE puts forward the two groups, Amelius and Belial, go to battle for a long time. And it is their various battles with the 2-eye technology, one on the spiritual side and the other using it, as kind of large scale EMP apotheum that destroys. First, the continent of Atlantis is split into 3 islands, and then from there, they have more and more battles. And by the end battle, it all takes place around the area of the hot zone, where between, say, Cuba, Bimini, and the Yucatan Peninsula and the coast of Florida. And the Law of One group loses, but the Belial group wins. But basically they've destroyed everything. So the Belial group, the Emilius group flees into America and into Egypt, into the Pyrenees, and the Belial group, what survives of them basically, seeks to create their kingdom over and over again. Now, so it is the Belial piece that seems to be that they want to reanimate when you get around some of the heavy scientific materialistic thinking that's going on now. And CAYCE giving us that vision is saying, kind of like to your unconscious, remember this, remember the terrible crystal, remember the high tech that was going on then, because the whole experience of humanity is coming back to face that Atlantean moment once again. Yes.
Shamanasanam Kara. Unfortunately, there are directed energy weapons that can pull the soul out of a body and that can allow a non-human to possess the body. A whistleblower from FEMA shared this in an interview. And Nanette Christ, while in government, I saw microchip people lose their conscience and become dead over time. So sad. They were told it was necessary to locate them.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm reminded of people who have severe drug addictions or things like that. I think that they check out and it loosens their system to these outside influences. So I don't see how utilizing the technology would be any different. I think technologically you could recreate an experience like that. Now, I also think there are safeguards naturally that people can intuitively, under any circumstances, even people who are in programs like that can still activate. They just, those tools need to be awakened in them. So yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that it does happen, and it's a tragedy, just like when you see the incredible, overdoses and people going and dying in these heroin and fentanyl overdoses. It's a kind of possession. And, the people who are benefiting are the people who are rolling that stuff out in the first place. And with fentanyl, we know that that's largely China. High-fiving our CIA on the drug runs. And with that, Miss Olivia?
I have one last question.
Yes.
That's my question to round all this out. Okay, so, we and everyone now seems to be looking around because of social media and whatnot at other people and trying to figure out, diagnose what's wrong with the world, what's wrong with humanity. And I'm just wondering what Steiner, for example, or Gurdjieff, or both, would say about how much our focus should be on ourselves versus focusing on others. How much attention should we spend on the problem versus working on ourselves and solving our own issues personally and our soul growth? Because I know that it should not be exclusive, one versus the other. It has to be both. But what is the ratio? What's the proper ratio?
Well, I mean, even in the New Testament, it says what you hate, you become, right? So you the 2 minutes hate thing in 1984 is real. That's how they maintain the brainwashing, is giving you something to hate. So that is that's hardcore. I don't think judgment is any kind of high ability. It's one of the most easy low down things that any of us can do. So no, but it's about calling out those who are in power and calling out their might and putting one at great risk to one's future and things by doing that is an incredibly courageous thing. So we have to separate out what these things are. And I think just haranguing and complaining about things, as the social media networks really want you to do, I think that there's far too much of that, and it creates a kind of a negative vortex and
It has
lives
its
off
own
of it.
addictive quality to it, going, look at that group's getting it wrong. And then you turn in the other direction, that group is getting it wrong too. And you can spend years of your life looking around at how everybody else is getting it wrong.
Yes.
And that there's nothing wrong with that, because you're trying to figure out how you can get it right in comparison. But then again, how do you focus on yourself getting it right when you figured out how others are getting it wrong? Do you know what I mean? Like,
there's no
all
question.
Of this takes so much damn time.
It does. There's also the thing about Arman is a master of division. So really to be a puppet of Arman is to be there in a very divisive mode. So that doesn't mean, when things are corrupt, you stay silent. And, silence can breed, it's either an intelligent thing or it's a cowardly thing. So it is, it depends on the situation. But it's very important to know where you're coming from, or from a spiritual point of view, when dealing with stuff like that. And I don't think it encourages, there are times when things need to be called out, and there are times when, it's just fun and all the rest. But when it becomes a negative vortex addiction, then that's very, very different. By the way, a couple of last minute bonuses here. That supposedly is the group in Germany that initiated Steiner.
Those look like very sober people.
Rosicrucian group, indeed. And of course, we know this is supposedly a painting of a photograph of Blavatsky with Moria Saint Germain. And that's her with the masters there. And I wanted to put this out there. It comes from the Thoth deck. And there's a fascinating story about the Thoth deck, which is there's so many different tarot things. But basically, this image of the priestess comes directly out of that. And it's remarkable because the artist who worked on it was this incredibly spiritual woman, but the person who got the commission for it was Aleister Crowley. So there's this weird, like if you can imagine, somehow this woman was able to elevate Crowley's work. So that's the kind of thing that we need to do with the Ahriman side, is when that thing comes in, you just kind of lift it up. And of course, not to forget Emma Britton's work as well. There was a section on Emma Britton and her meeting the masters, but I'm going to bring Emma Britton back on a show. She was the one who was used as a young girl as a mystic, and she had to channel things, and the people who were using her in this group were the Prime Minister of England. Charles Dickens was in the group. There were a lot of literary people and all the rest. And she was one of the most highly developed psychics. She formed and formulated the Theosophical Society with Blavatsky. She did the Boston chamber, and Blavatsky did New York. And, the two of them worked closely until, she was far more Christian Western oriented and Blavatsky was more Eastern. But nonetheless, they got a lot done, as it were. And with that, Miss Olivia, that is the end. Finn, what do you got, super chat?
I have super chat. Just
read them for me.
1 second
Yes.
to get over there. Okay.
Oh, Steiner blackboard drawing. Try that one out.
Groovy.
Influences. Indeed. Go ahead.
I start to leave my body when I Okay. Okay, gotta thank Medley Childress, GDNPB, the Philip K. Dick Film Festival, Eurythmy is Fun, Norman Smith, Bella B., Jay Parsons, Roosevelt Media News, Jenny Renko, Calvin F. Center, Rosterman the Seer, Fulcanelli, Helena Wilcox, Mr. Wolf, Anani Mouse, Jessica Rodriguez, Norman Smith, Terry Doherty, Bill Mayo, Karen Carpenter, all set.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you very much for your support. And we, now more than ever, we appreciate it with all the things that we're doing and all the projects that are on the burner. We couldn't bring you these stories to all our subscribers. Thank you, because you keep us going. We will be back with you next week with this very powerful Apotheum presentation. You can't miss it. And this is something special that we shot in a number of locations, and it's got some incredible information, incredible people working on it, and it really is a step into a kind of production value and everything that I think you're going to appreciate very, very much. We'll be here with you next Friday with that, and I'll do a couple of shout outs here while I'm with you. Bo Krills, it's great to see you, sir. He says, hit the thumbs up on your way out. I like that.
Right on.
Now you're talking. Charlotte Knight, hi DJ. Have you heard of Particle X? Indeed, CERN Particle X, and we'll be talking about it for sure. Evan Fleet George, thanks so much, DJ and Olivia. Miss Olivia, you did a fantastic job.
you.
Bravo. By the way, I mentioned Emma Britton. That is her very, very interesting documentary, autobiography, Emma Hardinge Britton. And I brought her up a few times. I think her work is overlooked largely, but she's a powerful figure in all of this. Oh, wow, says Najat. I agree. Now we're talking. Golden Girl. Oh, we love you. We love you. She says, loves it, y'all.
Nena says wants to see your ex cufflinks.
Oh,
show them off.
They're here somewhere. Aha. There we go. Let's see. Golden Girl, Falcon Alley. Wow. James Douglas. You're the best. Thank you. Thank you so much. Shamanist Anam Kara. Thank you so much, DJ and Olivia. Such an enriching experience. Blessings one and all. Golden Girl. Deborah W. Just a fantastic group out there tonight. What a great ideas room that we all had. And Roosevelt Media, thank you, sir. So good to see you. We will see you all next week. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Martin Taylor, Orphic Circle, he says. Bingo. Got it. That is the quote of the night. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so much there with the Orphic Circle. And we touched on it on the way out here. We'll see you all next week on Friday at 8 p.m. Thank you very much for being with us. And those Mystery School Encounters, we're going to touch base with them all in March. So we'll see you all next week. And, it says end broadcast. But before we go, never let it be forgot that once there was a Camelot. And even though it says end broadcast,
never really ends.
It never really ends. Somewhere over the rainbow, as we started tonight. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you all next week.
God bless.
Have a great weekend.